3 days before my father's retirement celebration. The celebration I spent 4 months organizing, financing, and protecting. My mother sent me a text message that changed the way I looked at my family forever. "You are not wanted at Dad's celebration." The vote was unanimous. And before I could even process what I was reading, my sister sent a laughing emoji. That tiny yellow face hit harder than screaming ever could, because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't their sister. I was their unpaid emergency contact. And the worst part? Every contract for that entire event still had my name on it. So when the venue locked the doors, when 200 guests stood outside confused, when my father's perfect retirement celebration collapsed in public, my phone suddenly wouldn't stop ringing. But by then, I was finally done saving people who enjoyed watching me suffer. If you've ever been used by people who only remembered your value when they needed something from you, then this story is going to hit hard. So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and while you're listening, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now, because this revenge story traveled a lot farther than my family expected. Now, let me tell you exactly how my own family destroyed my father's retirement party, all because they thought I'd keep being the obedient daughter who cleaned up their messes. My name is Alyssa Bennett. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a senior event compliance coordinator for a medical conference company in Portland, Oregon. My entire career revolves around preventing disasters before they happen. I deal with contracts, vendor disputes, insurance requirements, emergency payments, venue liabilities. Basically, all the stressful details nobody else wants to touch. If a 6-figure conference falls apart because someone forgot a permit or missed a payment deadline, it becomes my problem, and I'm very good at my job. The funny thing is, my family loved that about me. Not because they respected me, but because it made me useful. I wasn't the favorite child growing up. My younger sister Claire had that role locked down before either of us even understood what favoritism was. Claire was loud, emotional, dramatic, beautiful in that exhausting social media way where every problem somehow became everybody else's responsibility. She could wreck a room emotionally and still walk out of it being comforted. Meanwhile, I became the reliable one, the calm one, the fixer. If Claire forgot to pay a bill, I covered it. If she fought with someone, I mediated. If Mom got overwhelmed, I handled things. If Dad stayed silent, I translated his silence into excuses everyone else could tolerate. That became my role in the family. Human duct tape. And like most people stuck in that role, I didn't even realize how unhealthy it was until everything finally snapped. My dad, Robert Bennett, had worked for the Portland Fire Department for 40 years as a mechanic. He wasn't a firefighter, running into burning buildings, but he kept every emergency vehicle operational. Engines, hydraulics, maintenance systems, the department depended on him. Outside our house, people adored him. Dependable Robert, quiet Robert, good man Robert. And to be fair, he wasn't cruel. That almost made it worse because cruel people are easy to identify. Passive people slowly drain you while convincing themselves they've done nothing wrong. Dad's greatest skill was silence. If Mom criticized me unfairly, silence. If Claire insulted me, silence. If I got excluded, silence. If I carried the burden for everybody, silence. He avoided conflict so aggressively that he became complicit in all of it. But I didn't fully understand that until the retirement party, started 4 months earlier during Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Mom stood dramatically at the kitchen counter announcing that Robert deserved a retirement celebration worthy of his legacy. She said legacy like she was accepting an award on his behalf. Claire immediately got excited about decorations and photos. "I'll handle the aesthetic side," she announced while scrolling Pinterest. That should have been my first warning. Sign, because in my family, aesthetic side meant posting pictures online while someone else did the actual labor. Then Mom turned toward me with that familiar expression, the one that always meant responsibility was about to land in my lap. "Alyssa," she said sweetly, "you know how to organize these things." And there it was. Not, "Would you like to help?" Not, "Can we work together?" Just quiet expectation because everyone already assumed I'd do it. Dad smiled at me from across the table. "You're good at this stuff, kiddo." That word used to mean everything to me. When I was little, I followed him around the garage while he repaired engines. I wore oversized department jackets and thought my father hung the moon. Every time he called me kiddo, some small part of me still wanted his approval, so I said yes. And for the next 4 months, I built that celebration almost entirely alone. I booked the historic Underhouse Ballroom downtown, a gorgeous restored venue with high ceilings, gold-trimmed chandeliers, and old brick walls lined with historic Portland photographs. It was expensive, but I negotiated a discount because of my professional event connections. I coordinated catering, arranged photography, designed printed programs, handled guest confirmations, organized parking permits, and reviewed liability insurance. I even created a shared event account so expenses stayed transparent. Mom contributed some money. Dad added some too. Claire? Claire contributed opinions. Expensive opinions. "Oh my God, no beige tablecloths. This isn't a funeral." Dad's slideshow needs better transitions. I think the centerpieces should feel more elevated. Elevated. That woman spoke entirely in Instagram captions. Meanwhile, I was staying awake past midnight fixing seating charts and reviewing contracts while still working full-time at my actual job, and nobody noticed. That's the thing about being the reliable person. People stop seeing your effort because they start viewing it as your natural state, like gravity, like electricity, like air conditioning. They only notice when it stops working. About 2 months into planning, I started realizing something uncomfortable. Nobody ever asked how I was doing. Every conversation became transactional. Mom would call and immediately launch into demands before even saying hello. "Did you confirm the shrimp option? Did you fix the RSVP issue? Can you cover the tasting fee until your father transfers money?" Claire was worse. At one point, she sent me links to 3 different dresses and asked which one would photograph best near the retirement banner. Not once did she ask how stressed I was. Not once. But still, I kept going because somewhere deep down, I thought maybe this celebration would matter. Maybe Dad would finally look at everything I'd done and really see me. Not as useful, as valuable. And honestly, that hope is what made the betrayal hurt so much later, because people can only destroy expectations you secretly still carry. 3 weeks before the retirement party, the pressure started getting worse. At first, it was little things. Claire suddenly wanted the seating arrangement changed because she didn't want one of her ex-boyfriends sitting near her current boyfriend. Mom wanted the catering menu upgraded after she told church friends the event was going to be elegant. Dad kept casually adding co-workers to the guest list like extra people magically didn't cost money. Every new request landed on me, like another brick being stacked on my shoulders, and somehow everyone acted like I was unreasonable anytime I mentioned budgets or deadlines. I remember standing in my apartment kitchen one night at almost midnight, reheating cold pasta while answering emails from the venue manager because Claire had suddenly decided she hated the floral arrangements she personally approved 2 weeks earlier. My laptop screen was glowing against the dark apartment, my food was untouched, and my phone kept vibrating every few minutes with more family demands. That was the moment I started feeling less like a daughter and more like unpaid staff. But the real problem started over a dress. Of all the things that eventually destroyed the entire celebration, it started with a stupid dress. Claire called me one afternoon while I was at work, practically squealing with excitement. "I found the perfect one," she said dramatically. "It's literally made for this event." Then she sent me a link to a designer dress that cost nearly $900. $900 for one night. I stared at the screen in disbelief while sitting in a conference room reviewing medical compliance documents. "Claire," I finally said, "that's insane." She immediately got defensive. "Wow, okay. Sorry for wanting to look nice at Dad's retirement." I pinched the bridge of my nose because conversations with Claire always felt like stepping into emotional quicksand. "I'm not saying don't look nice. I'm saying maybe don't spend almost $1,000 on a party we're already struggling to finance." There was a pause. Then came the sentence I should have expected. "Well, can you help me pay for it?" I actually laughed because I genuinely thought she was joking. She wasn't. When I said no, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Claire's tone became cold in that sharp, poisonous way she inherited from Mom. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes you act like money makes you better than everyone." That hit a nerve because she knew exactly how much I sacrificed financially for the family over the years. I helped cover Mom's dental work once when insurance didn't cover enough. I loaned Dad money after his surgery. I paid Claire's overdue rent twice in her 20s. But somehow, the second I established one boundary, I became selfish. "I already paid thousands toward this party," I reminded her. "I'm not buying. You a designer dress too." She hung up on me without another word. After that, something changed. It wasn't obvious at first, just little shifts in tone. Family group chats would go silent when I responded. Claire stopped updating me about slideshow plans. Mom suddenly became weirdly formal in texts. It felt like walking into a room seconds after people stopped talking about you. You know that feeling? That heavy silence where you can practically smell resentment hanging in the air? That's what those last few weeks felt like. Then came the dinner. I wasn't there for it, but later my cousin Ethan told me everything. Apparently, Mom hosted a small planning dinner at the house while I was working late at a conference event downtown. Claire was there, Dad was there, a few relatives too, and somehow during dinner, the conversation turned into a discussion about me. Ethan told me Claire started complaining that I was controlling the entire event and making everything stressful. Mom agreed. She said I had become difficult lately. Difficult. That word always gets used when someone stops being convenient. Then Claire apparently brought up the dress situation and told everyone I embarrassed her over one simple request. Ethan said Dad mostly stayed quiet while Mom and Claire talked. Quiet? Of course he did. Then Claire said something that made my stomach twist when Ethan repeated it later. She said, "Honestly, the party would probably feel lighter if Alyssa just didn't come." And instead of shutting that down, they discussed it. Like removing me from my own father's retirement celebration was some reasonable scheduling adjustment. Ethan said there was actual silence before Mom finally nodded slowly and said, "Maybe that's best. We don't need tension that night." Tension. That word kept echoing in my head later because apparently my feelings counted as tension, but their cruelty counted as peacekeeping. Then came the part that really hurt. Ethan told me Dad didn't agree, but he didn't disagree either. He just sat there rubbing his coffee mug while everyone else made the decision for him. 40 years fixing emergency vehicles, but when it came to protecting his own daughter, suddenly he couldn't find his voice. I didn't know any of this yet, though. At that point, I was still working nonstop trying to make his retirement unforgettable. 2 days later, I met with the venue manager, Denise, for a final walkthrough. Denise knew me professionally from previous corporate events, and she kept complimenting how organized everything was. "Your family is lucky to have you," she said, while reviewing the final ballroom setup. I almost laughed at the irony. We walked through the hall together discussing lighting placement, guest check-in flow, and catering timing. The ballroom looked beautiful, even half-assembled. Large gold chandeliers cast warm light over polished floors, while staff arranged tables beneath the huge retirement banner I designed myself. "Congratulations, Robert Bennett. 40 years of service. Seeing it hanging there made me emotional because despite everything, I still loved my dad. That's what complicated the entire situation. If I hated him, it would have been easier. But love mixed with disappointment creates a very specific kind of pain. It feels like mourning someone who's still alive. That same night, I finalized the seating chart at my apartment while eating takeout noodles directly from the carton because I was too exhausted to cook. My laptop was open, paperwork scattered everywhere, and my eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets all day. That's when my phone buzzed. I remember glancing at it absent-mindedly, expecting another vendor question. Instead, I saw Mom's name. The message preview alone made my chest tighten. You are not wanted at Dad's celebration. The vote was unanimous. For a second, I genuinely thought I misread it. I sat frozen staring at the screen while my brain tried to process the words. Not wanted. Unanimous. The room suddenly felt too quiet. My heartbeat became loud in my ears. Then another notification appeared. Claire had reacted with a laughing emoji. That stupid little yellow face broke something inside me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was so casual, so smug. Months of work, thousands of dollars, endless stress. And that's what I got in return. A laughing emoji. I remember putting my phone down slowly like it might explode in my hand. Then, I looked around my apartment at all the retirement paperwork covering my table, vendor contracts, receipts, seating charts, catering approvals. Every inch of my life had been consumed by this celebration for months. And suddenly, I understood something horrifying. They never saw me as part of the celebration. I was just the labor behind it. A few seconds later, another text came from Mom. It's for the best. Claire thinks there's been too much tension lately. I actually laughed then, but it didn't sound normal. It sounded sharp, empty, like something cracking. My eyes drifted toward the catering contract sitting beside my laptop, then toward the venue agreement, then the shared payment account information. One realization settled over me slowly and completely. Every important signature still belonged to me. And for the first time in my life, I stopped thinking like their daughter. I started thinking like an event compliance coordinator. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that laughing emoji glowing against my phone screen, like some tiny symbol of everything my family thought about me. Around 3 a.m, I finally gave up pretending I was going to rest and walked into my kitchen. The apartment was dark except for the light above the stove, and the silence felt heavy enough to press against my chest. I made coffee I didn't even want, then sat back down at the dining table surrounded by contracts, invoices, guest lists, and schedules. 4 months of my life spread out in front of me like evidence at a crime scene. That's when the emotional part of my brain finally started losing to the professional side. Because once the shock faded, my training kicked in automatically. In my job, when situations become unstable, you assess liability first. You document everything. You protect yourself before the collapse begins. And my family had just created a collapse without realizing I was the structural support holding the entire thing together. The first thing I did was open the shared event account. I downloaded every transaction record, every contribution, every reimbursement request, every payment confirmation. I wasn't even angry while doing it. That was the scary part. I felt calm, cold, focused. Mom had contributed $1,000. Dad added $1,500 over several months. Claire had contributed absolutely nothing besides opinions and drama. Meanwhile, I had personally covered the ballroom deposit, rush printing fees, tasting appointments, vendor insurance adjustments, transportation coordination, and emergency catering increases. Thousands of dollars, my money, my credit, my professional reputation. all supporting an event I had just been banned from attending. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Part of me still wanted to believe there had been some misunderstanding. Maybe Mom exaggerated. Maybe Dad would call and explain. Maybe Claire had manipulated the situation. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The real betrayal wasn't the vote. It was the silence afterward. Nobody reached out to apologize. Nobody said they appreciated my work. Nobody even pretended to care how humiliating this was. They expected me to quietly absorb the damage like I always did. Then my phone buzzed again. Claire. You need to stop being dramatic. I actually smiled at that because the irony was unbelievable. They excluded me from the event I built, and somehow I was the dramatic one. Another message appeared immediately after. We just want one peaceful night without tension. That word again. Tension. As if my existence itself was some unpleasant disruption they needed removed for everyone else's comfort. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for several seconds before I finally typed back. Understood. That was it. One word. Claire responded with a thumbs-up emoji like we'd just settled dinner plans instead of detonating our relationship. By sunrise, I had made my decision. Not revenge, consequences. There's a difference. Revenge is emotional, messy, impulsive. Consequences are clean, professional, accurate. And if my family wanted me removed from the celebration, then they were going to experience exactly what that meant. At 7:15 that morning, I emailed the catering company. The message was calm, polite, and painfully professional. Due to a change in family authorization structure, I am withdrawing myself as the financially responsible coordinator for the Bennett retirement event. Please require direct payment confirmation and signed liability acceptance from remaining hosts before proceeding with service. I attached copies of the account, information and contract sections highlighting my authorization role. Then I hit send. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Melissa, the catering coordinator. Alyssa. Is everything okay? She asked carefully. Her voice sounded genuinely concerned, and weirdly enough that almost upset me more because a stranger showed more emotional awareness than my own family. I stared out my apartment window at the gray Portland morning before answering. I'm no longer attending the event, I said quietly. And I won't be financially responsible for an event I've been excluded from. There was a pause on the line. Oh, she finally said softly, not angry, not judgmental, just understanding. Then her professional tone returned. Without authorization and payment confirmation, we'll need resolution by tomorrow afternoon, or service cannot proceed. I understand, I replied, and I did. Because this wasn't sabotage, this was standard liability policy. Next came the venue. That call felt heavier somehow because Denise actually knew me personally. When she answered, her tone was cheerful at first. Morning, Alyssa. Final setup looks beautiful, by the way. I swallowed hard before speaking. Denise, I need to withdraw my personal guarantee from the Bennett event. Silence. Then, are you canceling? I looked down at the printed seating chart sitting beside me. Someone had physically removed my name from the family table using red marker. Red marker. They couldn't even bother printing a new copy. My chest tightened again, but this time the pain carried anger underneath it. I'm not canceling the ballroom, I said evenly. I'm removing myself as the responsible guarantor. Remaining hosts may continue if they assume financial and contractual responsibility directly. Denise exhaled slowly. Alyssa, if they don't sign and pay outstanding balances, we legally can't open the hall. I know. Another silence. Then quietly, I'm sorry. That almost broke me, because again, strangers understood the situation faster than my family ever would. After the venue call, I sat motionless for a while, staring at my laptop screen. My reflection looked exhausted. Eyes swollen, hair messy. 34 years old, and still somehow trying to earn love through usefulness. The realization made me feel embarrassed more than sad. Then I opened the event email account and sent one final message. Due to internal host authorization changes, all event coordination responsibilities are now directed to Linda Bennett and Claire Bennett. Please contact them regarding all future questions, payments, and confirmations. I copied Mom. I copied Claire. Then I closed the laptop. The explosion started less than 3 minutes later. Mom called first, then Claire, then Mom again, then Dad, then Claire. 5 more times. My phone vibrated nonstop across the table like it was possessed. Texts poured in faster than I could read them. What did you do? Call me immediately. You're acting insane. You're embarrassing this family. Dad is stressed enough already. Fix this now. That last message came from Claire, of course. Fix this now. Even after banning me, she still instinctively expected me to rescue the situation. That's how deeply my role had been carved into the family dynamic. I wasn't allowed emotional dignity, but I was still expected to provide labor. I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Instead, I started saving screenshots. Every text, every voicemail. Every accusation. For once in my life, I wanted proof of what they really sounded like when they couldn't control the narrative. Around noon, there was a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find my cousin Ethan holding 2 coffees and wearing the expression of someone approaching a wounded animal carefully. I brought caffeine and absolutely no judgment, he said gently. That almost made me cry on the spot. Ethan had always been different from the rest of the family. Less performative, less cruel. He actually listened when people spoke instead of waiting for his turn to talk. I stepped aside and let him in. He sat at the kitchen table looking over the scattered paperwork while my phone continued vibrating every few seconds. So, he said carefully, I heard about the vote. I laughed bitterly. Apparently, it was unanimous. His jaw tightened immediately. No, it wasn't. That caught my attention. Ethan took a slow sip of coffee before continuing. Uncle Mike wasn't there. And honestly, Dad barely spoke. The mention of my father made my stomach twist again. Ethan looked down at the contracts spread across the table. You know what the craziest part is? He asked quietly. They actually thought they could remove you emotionally while still keeping all the infrastructure you built. Infrastructure, such a cold word. But he was right. That's exactly what I was to them. Infrastructure, reliable, functional, invisible until failure happened. I rubbed my forehead tiredly. They're saying I ruined Dad's retirement. Ethan looked genuinely confused. No, Alyssa. They ruined it when they kicked out the person holding it together. That sentence sat heavily in the room between us, because deep down, I knew he was right. And somewhere beneath all the hurt, another feeling was beginning to grow, not guilt. Clarity. The next morning felt strangely calm, like the quiet before a storm finally tears through a city. I woke up after maybe 2 hours of sleep and immediately checked my phone. 43 unread messages, 7 missed calls from Mom, 11 from Claire, 3 from Dad. There were also messages from relatives who clearly only knew the version of the story my mother had already started spreading. Your father is heartbroken. This isn't the time for family drama. Be the bigger person. That phrase again, be the bigger person. Funny how in families like mine, being bigger always meant accepting disrespect quietly, so everyone else could stay comfortable. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the sunlight creeping through. the blinds while anxiety twisted slowly in my stomach. For a brief moment, I almost gave in. Seriously. I almost called Denise and told her I'd reinstate the guarantee. Not because my family deserved it, but because humiliation terrified me. I kept imagining Dad standing outside the venue embarrassed, in front of coworkers after 40 years of service. That image hurt. No matter how angry I was, part of me still loved him enough to feel guilty. And honestly, that was the hardest part of the whole situation. People think betrayal automatically kills love. It doesn't. Sometimes betrayal and love exist together long enough to tear you apart from the inside. Around 10 in the morning, Dad finally texted me directly instead of letting Mom and Claire attack first. "Alyssa, your mother says there's a problem with the venue." I stared at the screen for a long time because those 14 words perfectly summarized my entire relationship with him. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "We handled this badly." Just, "There's a problem." Even now, I was still the repair technician expected to fix the machinery after everyone else broke it. I typed 3 different responses before deleting them all. Finally, I just wrote, "You voted me out of your celebration." Several minutes passed before the typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, his message came through. "Your mother thought it would reduce tension." My chest tightened instantly. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't say. He didn't defend me. He didn't disagree with her. He simply explained her reasoning like a bystander describing weather conditions. I called him after that because suddenly texting felt too small for the amount of pain sitting inside me. He answered almost immediately. "Kiddo," he said softly. And hearing that word nearly destroyed my resolve. For one dangerous second, I wanted to be 8 years old again, standing beside him in the fire department garage while he lifted me onto workbenches and let me hold flashlights during repairs. I wanted that version of my father back so badly it physically hurt. But then I remembered the laughing emoji. I remembered my name crossed off the seating chart in red marker. I remembered being voted out like an inconvenience. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "Why didn't you stop them?" Silence. I could hear him breathing through the phone, traffic somewhere behind him, a car door shutting. Then finally he sighed. "I didn't want to fight before retirement." That sentence hollowed me out completely, because that was the truth, wasn't it? My father sacrificed me for convenience, not hatred, not cruelty. Convenience. He chose temporary peace over defending his daughter because confrontation made him uncomfortable. And somehow that hurt even more than open rejection would have. "So you let them humiliate me instead," I whispered. "It wasn't supposed to become this big," he said quickly. "Claire just thought—" I cut him off immediately. "No, stop blaming Claire," Mom agreed. "You stayed silent. All 3 of you made this decision." He grew quiet again, and I realized something awful in that moment. He genuinely thought silence made him innocent. Like refusing to participate directly erased responsibility. But silence is still a choice. Especially when someone you love is being hurt right in front of you. Then he said the sentence every emotionally neglected child eventually hears from family. "Can't you just be the bigger person?" I closed my eyes slowly. There it was. The real expectation underneath everything. Endure the disrespect. Absorb the humiliation. Rescue everyone anyway. Return to your role quietly so the family system keeps functioning. Suddenly, I felt exhausted down to my bones. "I've been the bigger person for 34 years, I said softly. And all it taught everyone was that they could keep hurting. Me without consequences. He tried speaking again, but this time I hung up first. My hands were shaking afterward, not from anger, from grief. because that call forced me to accept something I'd avoided my whole life. My father loved me, but not enough to inconvenience himself for me. And once you realize that about a parent, something inside you changes permanently. Later that afternoon, Uncle Mike called. Unlike everyone else, he didn't start with accusations. He just said, "I heard there was a vote." His voice already sounded disgusted before I answered. I leaned against my kitchen counter and laughed bitterly. "Apparently unanimous." He muttered a curse under his breath immediately. "I wasn't there," he snapped. "And if I had been, I would have shut that nonsense down fast." That was the first time since this entire disaster started that someone in my family spoke like I mattered instead of speaking like I was a malfunctioning appliance causing inconvenience. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Uncle Mike continued talking, anger building in his voice. "What kind of people ban the person paying for the damn party?" I covered my eyes with one hand because hearing someone finally say the truth out loud almost made me emotional. Not dramatic, not oversensitive, not difficult, hurt, justifiably hurt. By the day of the retirement celebration, the tension had spread through the family like smoke. Relatives were calling each other confused. Vendors were demanding payment confirmations. Guests were asking questions online because nobody knew whether the event was still happening. And through all of it, Mom kept acting like this was somehow my fault. Around noon, she left me a voicemail that perfectly captured her entire personality. Her voice sounded shaky and tearful, but underneath it was irritation instead of empathy. "Honey, this is not the time to prove a point," she said. Honey. She only called me that when she needed something. "Your father has people flying in for this. Just fix it and we'll discuss everything later." Later, meaning never. Families like mine always promise future conversations they never intend to have because delaying accountability is easier than facing it honestly. At 1:07 p.m., the family group chat exploded. Claire wrote, "Why is the venue saying we need authorization?" Mom followed immediately after. "Alyssa, enough already." Dad said nothing at all. Then Uncle Mike entered the chat like a wrecking ball. "Why are you asking Alyssa to save an event you banned her from attending?" The silence afterward was incredible. You could practically feel everyone staring at their phones trying to figure out how to respond without admitting the truth. Finally, Claire typed, "Stay out of it." Uncle Mike replied instantly, "No, you turned your father's retirement into a punishment for your sister because she stopped funding your nonsense." I actually smiled reading that. Then Ethan texted me privately. "Guests are already outside the venue asking questions." My stomach flipped painfully. Despite everything, reality suddenly felt too real. I opened Facebook and saw confused comments spreading under relatives' posts. Is the event delayed? Why are the doors locked? Does anyone know what's happening? One retired firefighter even posted a photo standing outside Underhouse Ballroom beside several confused guests. The doors behind them were locked. Seeing that image made my pulse race because this wasn't private anymore. The consequences had escaped the family and entered public view. And the terrifying part? I still had the power to fix everything. One phone call, one signature, one transfer, I could still save them. That realization sat in my chest like a weight made of concrete. At 2:47 that afternoon, Ethan sent me a picture that I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. The Sierra front steps of Underhouse Ballroom were crowded with guests in formal clothes standing awkwardly beneath the retirement banner hanging behind the locked glass doors. Some people looked confused, others looked irritated. A few were already checking their phones or whispering to each other. In the middle of all of it stood my mother with one hand covering her mouth while Claire paced back and forth angrily gripping her phone like she wanted to throw it into traffic. And my father just stood there with his shoulders slumped forward, staring at the doors I had spent months arranging to open for him. Ethan's message underneath the photo was simple. "They're asking for you." I stared at that sentence for a long time because suddenly the entire situation stopped feeling theoretical. The collapse had officially happened. Not because I destroyed anything, but because for the first time in my life, I stopped holding everything together after being treated like I didn't matter. I grabbed my coat and keys before I could overthink it. During the drive downtown, my stomach twisted harder with every red light. Portland's streets looked gray and wet from earlier rain, and the windshield wipers moved back and forth in slow, rhythmic clicks that somehow made the silence inside the car feel heavier. Part of me wanted to turn around and go home. Not because I regretted what I'd done, but because I knew something irreversible was waiting for me at that venue. Once I stood in front of my family and forced them to face the consequences publicly, there was no pretending afterward. No going back to smiling through holidays while swallowing resentment quietly. No more fake peace. When I finally pulled up outside Underhouse Ballroom, I saw the banner immediately. "Congratulations, Robert Bennett. 40 years of service." Gold lettering, fire department emblem in the corner. The exact font I spent nearly an hour choosing because I wanted it to look dignified and warm at the same time. Seeing it hanging behind locked glass almost shattered me emotionally because suddenly I remembered how excited I'd been while designing it. I had cared so much about honoring my father properly. I had wanted him to feel celebrated, respected, loved, and somehow the same man I worked so hard to honor couldn't even defend me from being removed like unwanted furniture. Ethan spotted me first near the side entrance. He walked over quickly, lowering his voice. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," he said carefully. I looked toward the crowd again. Some guests had already noticed me arriving. Heads were turning, whispers spreading. I took a slow breath. "No," I said quietly. "I do." The second Claire saw me, she stormed across the sidewalk so aggressively people physically stepped out of her way. Her face was red with fury, makeup slightly smeared from stress and crying. "Finally!" she snapped. "Go tell them this was all a misunderstanding." I blinked slowly at her because the audacity genuinely stunned me. Even now, standing outside locked doors in front of humiliated guests, she still expected me to rescue her from consequences. "A misunderstanding?" I repeated calmly. "You voted me out." Claire threw her hands up dramatically. "Oh my God, this is not about that right now." I stepped closer until she couldn't avoid eye contact anymore. "No, Claire, this is exactly about that." Mom hurried over next, heels clicking against the pavement, eyes wet and panicked. "Alyssa, please," she whispered urgently. "People are watching." That sentence almost made me laugh because it revealed everything about her priorities. Not "you're hurt," not "we were wrong," just "people are watching." Public appearance always mattered more to my mother than private behavior. "They were watching when you removed me from the celebration I built," I answered quietly. Her expression tightened immediately, like she wanted to argue but couldn't risk doing it loudly in front of witnesses. Then Dad finally approached. For a second, seeing him standing there in his retirement suit nearly cracked my resolve completely. He looked older than usual, tired, smaller somehow. This was supposed to be one of the proudest days of his life, and instead, he was standing outside, locked doors while coworkers whispered nearby. But then I remembered something important. None of this happened accidentally. Every warning sign existed before today. Every cruel choice led directly here. Dad stopped a few feet away from me and spoke softly. "Alyssa, open the doors." Not, "Can we talk?" Not, "I'm sorry." Just another request, another problem needing repair. I held up my phone calmly. "I can't," I said. I withdrew my guarantee. The venue requires payment and signed liability responsibility. Before reopening the event, Mom looked horrified. We don't have that kind of money available today. I nodded once. I know. That's why you used my name. Claire scoffed loudly beside us. You're enjoying this. I turned toward her slowly. No, I said evenly. Enjoying it was sending a laughing emoji after helping remove me from Dad's retirement celebration. This isn't enjoyment. This is accountability. For the first time all day, Claire didn't immediately have a response. Dad rubbed his forehead tiredly before speaking again. What do you want from us? The question hung in the cold afternoon air while guests pretended not to listen nearby. I looked directly at him. I want someone to finally say the truth out loud. Mom's face changed instantly. Alyssa, don't do this here, she hissed quietly. But I was past protecting their comfort. No, I answered. You chose here the moment you voted me out publicly. Then I looked back at Dad. Tell the truth. The silence afterward felt enormous. Cars passed on the street behind us. Guests shifted awkwardly near the entrance. Somewhere farther, down the block, a siren echoed faintly through downtown Portland. Dad swallowed hard and looked at the ground for several seconds before finally speaking. We shouldn't have excluded you. Hearing the words hit me harder than I expected. My chest tightened instantly, but he kept going, voice quieter now. And I shouldn't have stayed silent. Mom looked stunned beside him like she couldn't believe he'd admitted fault publicly. Claire folded her arms angrily and stared at the sidewalk. But me? I just stood there trying to process the fact that after 34 years, my father had finally acknowledged what he did instead of hiding behind silence. I pulled out my phone then and opened the shared account in front of all of them. With a few taps, I transferred back every verified dollar Mom and Dad personally contributed toward the event. The confirmation screens appeared one after another. Your money has been returned, I said calmly. Mine stays with me. My name stays off every contract. Claire stared at me in disbelief. So you came down here just to humiliate us? I looked around slowly at the locked ballroom, the expensive decorations behind the glass, the confused guests still lingering nearby. Then I shook my head. No, I came here so nobody could lie later and say I destroyed something I wasn't even allowed to attend. That sentence landed hard because everyone standing there knew it was true. Mom started crying harder after that. Real crying this time. We're still family, she whispered desperately. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. Family isn't something you use after hurting someone, I said softly. Family is how you treat people before you need them. Dad closed his eyes briefly when I said that like the words physically hurt. Maybe they did. Denise, the venue manager, stepped outside a few minutes later and professionally explained that the ballroom could still reopen immediately if someone signed liability responsibility and paid the remaining balance. Dad looked at Mom. Mom looked at Claire. Claire looked away entirely. And for the first time in my entire life, nobody looked at me to solve it for them. Honestly, that was the most peaceful moment of the entire day, because they finally had to carry their own weight. In the end, they moved the celebration to a nearby restaurant with a smaller private room. No ballroom, no slideshow projector, no catered grand entrance. Half the guests left before the dinner even started. Mom later uploaded carefully cropped photos online, pretending everything went beautifully, but everyone who stood outside those locked doors knew the truth already. You can't publicly humiliate someone for months and then act shocked when they stop protecting your image. That night, I went home exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical energy. I ordered Thai food, sat beside my apartment window, and watched rain slide slowly down the glass while the city lights blurred outside. Around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed again. Dad. I stared at the message for several seconds before opening it. "I mentioned your name during my speech," he wrote. "I told everyone you planned most of the celebration. I should have said it sooner." My eyes burned reading that because part of me had wanted that acknowledgement my entire life. But timing matters. Recognition after public collapse doesn't erase abandonment before it. After a long pause, I finally replied, "Yes, you should have." A minute later, another message appeared. "Can we talk sometime?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I wanted revenge, but because for the first time in my life, access to me no longer felt automatic. And honestly, that was the real consequence they never expected. The venue collapsing wasn't the deepest loss that day. Losing unlimited access to the version of me who silently fixed everything after being disrespected. That was the part they never saw coming. So if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's this. Love without respect, eventually, becomes labor. And family without accountability becomes emotional imprisonment. You can love people deeply and still refuse to fund your own humiliation. You can forgive someone eventually and still make them face consequences first. Because boundaries are not cruelty. Sometimes they're the first honest thing you've ever done. And if this story hit you hard, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments. If your family banned you from an event you built with your own hands, would you have forgiven them that same day? Or would you have walked away too?